everyone has a white whale. Something that haunts them, consumes them, an obsession that drives them, takes the thing they love, the thing that defines them, and turns it on them. A dark and terrible force that tears the rational mind asunder, simultaneously existing as a symbol of hope and a harbinger of doom. For me, that whale is a simple question. Is Kojima serious? I consider myself a fairly good literary analyst. I essentially have a degree in just that. So when I say that for the life of me I can't make heads or tails of Hideo Kojima's writing, you can be goddamn sure I gave it a good effort. I'll admit, I used to dismiss him as a hack, but his games are at least pretty fun to play, and his fans are very devoted, so about the time Death Stranding came out to aggressively mixed reception, I decided to give him another look. Because what interested me is that the opinions people had on Death Stranding seemed to line up with how seriously they took it. And I came upon the question, well, is it supposed to be serious? A game that features a pivotal pissing mechanic, unborn baby batteries, monster energy T-fucking-M, a character named Heartman who lives by a heart-shaped lake and has a heart condition that stops his heart every 20 minutes. Do you get it, player? Hi, I'm Hideo Kojima, says Hideo Kojima, and this is my game, written and directed and produced and personally packaged and delivered to you by me, Hideo Kojima. Do you get it yet? I like movies! I played Death Stranding. All the way through. No, I didn't like it. Not because I thought it was boring, but because I felt it was dumb. And in doing so, I thought I had won. Proven to myself that given full control of his narrative, Kojima would unfailingly pump out 30 hours of pretentious drivel. But like Ahab, I was an arrogant fool, and I had only driven a single, meaninglessly flashy harpoon into my white whale's side, soon to be scattered to the waters with my helpless crew, more confused and scared than I could have possibly imagined. The metaphor isn't perfect here, but to sum it up,
Metal Gear. It can't be.
the first thing you notice about Metal Gear Solid is that Snake never fails to repeat the most important thing said to him in the form of a question. As if playing the world's weirdest game of Jeopardy, Snake's deceptively simplistic way of communicating could, in theory at least, produce an infinite chain of self-reproducing exposition. This is the building block of the ludicrously complex Kojima lore system, so incredibly stupid it practically becomes genius. Like the cunning snake, be it solid or any other state of matter, it hides in plain sight, obvious to the point of being almost self-referential, drawing you in by virtue of its own audacity. As amusing as it is, it's technically weak writing and emblematic of a nearly compulsive injection of unnecessary bullshit into every Kojima game. This is the great contradiction that started it all, because it shouldn't work, but it really does, at least for a while. In the original Metal Gear Solid, which is the 7th or 8th Metal Gear game, chronologically speaking, the iconic beats were always going to be the meta ones, like Psycho Mantis reading your save card and making you switch controller ports. But the game endures because it balanced surprisingly enjoyable stealth gameplay with a clever parody of its influences. Diegetically upping the difficulty with increasingly useless video calls and increasingly absurd and overkill security measures, all the backtracking and waiting, it was never so much that you forgot it was poking fun. Snake's oddly reflective and even sensitive nature kind of harmonized with the gimmick Kojima was running, because you knew you were getting this bizarre satire of Cold War insanity. Metal Gear Solid 2 continued the series' trademark habit of thinking outside the box, but aside from the introduction of Iroquois Pliskin, the greatest fictional name ever conceived, the game's actual story was significantly more bogged down by its wacky ideas than its predecessor. Again, with Snake Eater, the part everyone knows best is the latter segment, as frustrating and pointless as it is surprisingly charming. But despite the still enjoyable gameplay, the overarching story continues to make less sense, and the Kojima Paradox starts to take hold, leaving more casual fans of the series to wonder if the decisions Kojima makes are quite as tongue-in-cheek as we used to tell ourselves. Metal Gear Solid 4 represents the best and worst Kojima has to offer, pinballing between delightful quirks and exhausting mechanics, between shockingly well-directed spectacle and incessantly bloated exposition dumps. I could try to go on with Phantom Pain, but my god, I don't even remember the story. You see where I'm going, though. The Metal Gear Solid series is a vital part of video game history, packed to the brim with memorable moments, lovable characters, and enough absolutely bananas twists and turns to give M. Night Shyamalan whiplash. But as they go on, it's undeniable that they become increasingly Kojima. There's no avoiding the influence of his success, of course, and if nothing else, his auteur status deserves some respect in an increasingly lazy and copycat industry. But to finally lay down my honest feelings, I'll take a quote from an actually talented writer, Bo Burnham.
Original does not mean good.
For a man who so deeply champions his own craft, the unfortunate truth is that after over 20 years of increasing creative liberty, the only two coherent points Kojima has made are that he hates the military-industrial complex, and he absolutely loves interior side boob. For whatever credit he gets accidentally predicting socio-political issues, he's by no measure the only one, and he really doesn't have much more to say about them than the average teenager, with just as much, if not somehow even more, pretentious veneer. But I realize this is the most subjective point I can bring up, so I won't dwell on it. We already know what I think of Kojima's writing. What we set out to discover is what Kojima thinks of it. And so we arrive at the source of my madness, the bane of my existence, the stump of my intellectual leg.
What a thrill, with darkness and silence through the night.
Allow me to return briefly to the topic of Death Stranding. Before its launch, Kojima hailed it as a new era and labeled it the first Strand-type game. He never clarified what that actually means, but the collective consensus was that he was creating something significantly story-focused and cinematic, too interactive to be a movie, but too aesthetically precise to be lumped in with the likes of Naughty Dog and Santa Monica, more performance art than video game. Ultimately, that decision proved divisive, with most critics pointing out the gameplay of carrying heavy things slowly being too monotonous and stale to justify its bizarre and somewhat muddled story. Kojima snapped back with the classic "Americans are too stupid to understand my work" angle, and suddenly the Pandora's box of the funny cutscene man was opened. Kojima may just be dead serious. The man who once made you sit in a cold room for 5 real-life minutes to cool a keycard could have convinced himself it would genuinely benefit your understanding of an aging super soldier's existential crisis. Irony is a labyrinth. It's easy to take so many turns you find yourself looking not for the center, but the opening you came from. What if became my hypothesis? Hideo Kojima has been drowned in so many layers of irony, he's forgotten that his work was once satirical. My research was, as one might expect, exhausting. Kojima is not an open book of a man. As a less than zealous critic of his work, I was unaware of this before I began my proverbial deep dive. I would have thought that a man who loves exposition with all the tender smothering of a sitcom Jewish mother would be running out of titles for his many memoirs. But alas, Kojima is only interested in telling stories that make no sense. Not necessarily a problem, there's always a story to be found in the quotes. So I began, as I felt he would want me to, with his influences. One would have to start with Escape from New York, obviously, and anime in general. It would seem from the onset that Kojima has a thing for over-the-top ideas, which would certainly help inform his satirical beginnings, like the infamous Starship Troopers finding the pinnacle of satire in being dangerously self-serious. However, the deeper you go into Kojima's alleged muses, the more it feels like he doesn't quite grasp their own mission statements. To pick out a simplistic example, recognizing the often cynical nature of anti-imperialist mecha anime like Gundam and, to a lesser extent, Eva, you'd expect to connect the thematic dots to the Metal Gears, which are giant mechs. But Kojima claims he instead takes his anti-war influence from Planet of the Apes, and it really shows, too, how the focus is on the dangers of state-driven war technology as opposed to the people who handle it, or the misguided platform they often stand for. This kind of casual mismanagement of source material is more the rule than the exception. Kojima's fascination with shadowy organizations and ridiculous bioweaponry tends to pull from his apparent efforts to craft a story about the negative effects of militarism, in the same way that his boundless love for Portopia feels less like it informed his work with tight but natural writing and more like it mutated his perpetual hard-on for exposition. As I dig deeper and deeper into the world according to Kojima, I start to feel reality warp around me. Is this the bent vision of a man who simply sees absurdity in everything, or is it a more nihilistic and indignant flair, a man who simply refuses to acknowledge the strength of stories he wishes he'd written? Who chooses to see them at such a surface level he might metaphorically spit in the face of their intent? I take to the only sanctuary of even remotely unpolished Kojima-ism, his Twitter account, and what I find shakes me to my core. It is the exact same thing. References, ostentatious nonsense, and an oppressive abundance of Hideo Kojima. My white whale is no mere mammal, but a leviathan of biblical proportions. There is no disconnect between the id and the ego. The living extension of the artist is metaphorically singular. I feel myself drowning in the murky waters of the deluded creator. Kojima really is God, because Kojima lives in his own world. This must be the answer. And my mission now is to uncover any and all evidence that this man can even be brought back to reality. But I find nothing. The riptide may take me before the whale is finished chewing through the remnants of my crew, and the cruelest mockery only just now dawns on me. He wants to make movies. Hideo Kojima, Mr. My Games Are Movies, actually making a goddamn movie. It's peak irony. The Ouroboros is complete. There is nothing more inside out than Kojima Productions finally planning to just cut out the middleman, and I couldn't be more hysterically overjoyed. My God, I hope Guillermo del Toro will co-produce the reboot of Metal Gear Solid, the 5-part Netflix miniseries written and directed by Hideo Kojima, based on the Metal Gear Solid movie based on the series Metal Gear Solid from Hideo Kojima, featuring indie director of the original movie Jordan Vogt-Roberts in a super special cameo role as the voice of the sentient arm of Liquid Ocelot. Are you listening to this? I am grasping for any semblance of cohesion now, unraveling in my helpless fight against the impending truth. If you need another Moby Dick analogy, you could say I'm drifting on the splinters of my ship's hull, cradling the lifeless corpse of Queequeg in my arms, spiritually grappling with the immortality and the unending ferocity of the beast. I say a quick prayer and I dive into the waters, the comprehensive lore of the Metal Gear series, trying to follow the dissipating trail of blood back to my nemesis. Surely, I convince myself, if nothing else, I can follow the through line of a 20-year-old series and reverse engineer the evolution of Kojima's narrative tenet. I prepare myself for the worst, the raw and unfiltered entirety of the Metal Gear timeline, the psychological obstacle course of one of the most convoluted stories in the history of fiction, to decipher not only the meaning but the nature of its creator's intent, one with such an aloof and enigmatic public persona. It's less of a challenge and more of a death wish, a meaningless and pitiful shriek into the abyss, but it's all I have. I've given my soul to my vendetta, my quest to prove once and for all that Hideo Kojima is a hack and nothing more. I will have my validation, my vindication, and as I scroll slowly and hatefully down the absurd and practically nonsensical wall of text I've staked my very sense of self on, a curious thought swims past me. At first, gently, almost floats, and then en masse like an army of krill flying past in desperation to escape the monster before me. Why am I doing this? Like the great and terrifying open maw of the white whale, the answer, the final answer, unceremoniously revealed itself to me and swallowed me whole. No matter how deep the rabbit hole goes, it will always go deeper. The Hatter can always get madder. The crazy train of wacky names and awkward references and painfully incoherent writing will ride to the end of the expanding universe and shatter the fabric of space-time as it careens into the ether, because it can, because it will. Because Kojima doesn't care. Yes, my friends, let the truth wash over you like the aging cascade of time rain. Let it into you. It goes down smooth like Monster Energy, doesn't it? Hideo Kojima, quite simply, does not give a fuck. He never has, and he never will. Apathy is the core, the beating heart of the Kojima narrative, and each installment of his wildly acclaimed Metal Gear series, nothing more than an escalating game of chicken with the very concept of consumable art. And Death Stranding, his magnum opus, his siren song of the liberated auteur, a grand and shining middle finger to the money-grubbing parasites at Konami, as if to say, all you had to do was let me be, and I would have tried. Silent Hills would have been a masterpiece, but why even bother? As you crash and burn in the wingless chassis of Metal Gear Survive, I implore you, look upon my true progeny, my monstrosity, so tongue-in-cheek it bores through the flesh and hangs over the jaw. But was it worth it? Death Stranding was a commercial success, sure, but it was widely seen as a step down, too experimental, too frankly boring to carry its pretentious narrative. One might think that, like Icarus, Kojima flew too close to the sun, tempted the insatiable Abaddon of the gaming industry with one too many minutes of unskippable beach wandering. But you, the proverbial unsatisfied player, you fail to see the bigger picture, because Hideo Kojima has not one, but two hands, and he saved his other middle finger just for you. You say the story makes no sense, but your breath is wasted. Kojima didn't want you to understand his game. He didn't want you to like it. He wanted you to sit through 30 hours of Norman Reedus pissing out time beer and furiously liking other people's ladders. And he wanted you to know goddamn well that you did it because he told you to. It's a beautiful thing, at least in a vacuum. Like the slithery snake, be it punished or otherwise karmically neutral, it hides in plain sight. So hilariously obvious, we would never stop to think that the joke was always on us. Truly, the Andy Kaufman of tactical espionage action, Hideo Kojima has not simply won, but dominated his game of parasocial checkers. Maybe not against you, but certainly against me, and I can at least admit to that now. I once thought that I held fast against the popular opinion, and that made me strong. But it was never about whether the games were good. I lost simply by thinking about Kojima's work long enough to formulate an articulate opinion, let alone write about it. Even as these closing sentences escape the charred husk of my psyche and mock me in the cold blue light of my computer, I can't help but think I was somehow cheated. That is the Kojima Paradox. A narrative black hole, a place from which abstract literary concepts can be infinitely stretched and yet simultaneously erased from existence. Somewhere in the unfathomable expanse of that Mobius plot device, I am still helplessly clawing at the insides of the whale. In space? In space. It's a space whale. Fuck it. Can't even fucking do metaphors anymore. That's how much Kojima broke me.